Welcome back to the Fleeting Conversations podcast. My name is Matthew Leffler. I love trailers. I love motor carriers. I love brokers. I love this industry that I find myself in. And I'm so excited today to talk with someone I met for the very first time in real life, but I've been following him for many, many years. Dave Broering will be with us in just a moment. He heads the brokerage division, the integrated logistics of NFI, one of the best known and one of the largest for-hire motor carriers in the United States. This conversation has been a long time coming. I am so passionate about this industry that has helped put food on the table for my family for generations. From my grandfather hauling grain to my dad doing maintenance and repair for both roadway, airborne, and his own company, Outsourced Fleet Services, and what I do today in the leasing space, helping truckers and brokers find affordable, quality trailers because I love trailers. Oh, I do love those 53-foot boxes with swing doors, maybe a 28-foot pup with a roll-up. Talk about a reefer. Oh, I love those trailing assets. I want to also mention, again, we talked about this for the first time last week, and I'm going to bring it up again today. I am so excited for our partnership with DAT. There's a hat, there's a logo. We're so excited. Since 1978, DAT has been helping truckers get home safely with profitable loads. The reality is we don't want empty miles. How do you find a way to eliminate, probably impossible, but reduce empty miles? Well, companies like DAT Freight and Analytics are the companies that are out there at the cutting edge, trying to help everybody make the most out of the supply chain. And my goodness, is this supply chain rough. Last week, we were joined by Jason Miller and Britton Ladd, and we talked about the after effects of Manifest, the big trade show organization we saw in Vegas. Manifest, the future of supply chain and logistics. It was my first Manifest, and I'll tell you, what I learned was astonishing. The need and the desire of the inevitability of automation is coming, not just for truck drivers, not just for maybe brokerages, but also for warehousing and manufacturing. This idea of trying to control labor has not been a problem for a little bit. It's been a problem since the very beginning. How do you find a way to navigate in an environment when you're trying to control and understand labor costs? Now, I will tell you in the future episodes coming down on Fleeting Conversations, we have some really great guests. Let me look at the board and see who they are. We have, Adam Wingfield. I love Adam Wingfield. He will be here in our next installment. After that, we have the incredible Brandon Wiseman. Brandon Wiseman is the founder of a company called TruckSafe. They are a consulting organization helping you with DOT compliance. He's also a partner at a law firm called the Childress Law Firm. He's a specialist in DOT regulations, and there's a lot of DOT regulations. And then finally, we have Chad Olson. Chad Olson will be coming on the podcast in April. We have a few more that are in the hopper, and we'll be releasing more information about those things. But let me cut to the chase. Here's the thing. You can't know where you're going unless you know where you are. And you can't know where you are unless you've known where you've been. It's a story of history. It's a story of a narrative of how do we as Americans get access to products? How do they get on the shelf? How do they end up at your doorstep? This is a function of orchestration at the highest level. And I don't understand it particularly well. I understand certain things, but there's things that I don't understand. And I want to understand what is the future of freight, not just in the next quarter or 2 quarters or 3 quarters, but what is the future looking like for the next 5 or 10 years? And there's only a few companies on the planet that have that kind of an outlook. And there's even fewer individuals who understand where you have been, where you are, and where you're going. And that's why I'm so excited to introduce you to my very special guest, Dave Broering of NFI. Dave, thank you for joining the podcast.
Hey, Matt, how you doing? I'm not sure I was prepared for 5 to 10 years of projections, but I guess we'll give it a shot.
Well, let's cut to the chase. Like, we are in a freight recession. And from what I understand, it hasn't been this brutal since 2008. Can you kind of give me an idea? Like, what are we really experiencing here right now in the North American supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's without a doubt, it's a freight recession, right? And every one of these is different. And I think the thing that people get caught up on or struggle with is they want to use the past as a guide for the present and as a predictor for the future. And the truth of the matter is that none of these have been the same, and none of the drivers of both the inflection up and the deflection down have ever actually been the same reasons. And with this one, we're dealing with the biggest curveball of all, which is COVID.
Yeah.
And the demand that came from COVID and the trillions of dollars the government pumped into the economy and gave to consumers to buy things that last a long time and maybe drove demand in a way that they didn't. And as a result, like I talk all the time about people having a mirror and whether it's broke or not. And what I say about that is when you look in your mirror every day, can you be real about what's actually going on with your business, with your life, with whatever it is? And there were a lot of providers in this industry, trucking companies, brokerages, 4PLs, shippers, all of us together who looked in the mirror in 22 and 21 and said, this is going to continue forever, or this is going to continue for a long time.
It'll always be positive and
it's
growth,
always
right?
going to be this way, right? And the one I like to say is the example I like to use a shipper, right? You just take any of the major home repair big boxes that are out there. They all sell appliances. Well, and they all sell outdoor furniture. Well, during the pandemic in 21, where was the only really safe place to hang out with your friends? It's outside. Anybody who didn't have great patio furniture, wanted to upgrade their patio furniture, they all went and bought patio furniture. Well, in 2021, most of these companies sold like 2 or 3 years worth of patio furniture in 1 year, and sold it in July, and they sold it in October, and they sold it in December. They sold it in times when they never would have sold it before. Well, what is inevitably going to happen on the backside of that? The demand for patio furniture is going to drop through the floor. But yet, the retailers believed that it was going to continue to be that way, and they filled the warehouses up with patio furniture in 2022, expecting that it was all going to get blown out like it did. And the providers who moved all that extra patio furniture around in 21 and 22 thought it was going to continue as well. And you can tell this story across 50 products.
Yeah.
And now people aren't buying patio furniture. They're taking that $2,000 they might have, and they're going to a F1 race, or they're going to a family vacation, or maybe they're buying a new TV, but they're not buying patio furniture, and they're not buying appliances. And then you add in all the cataclysm of the high interest rates and everything the government has done.
And student loans are back too.
And student loans and all these things that put extra money in consumers' pockets. The consumer isn't the problem. The problem is the industrial economy. And you had the best, in my opinion, the best transportation economist out there, the most realistic transportation economist out there. As much of a diehard Wolverines fan I am, I will still give all the credit in the world to Mr. Sparty, Jason Miller. I love him to death. He is pragmatic. He is direct. He is black and white, and his empirical data is irrefutable. When you look at the freight moving around on the road today, 63% of the ton miles driven comes from manufacturing. And manufacturing inventories are still 25, 30% higher than they were pre-pandemic. And manufacturing demand is still as subdued as it's been almost in the recorded history of manufacturing indexes. And yet here we are expecting a return coming in the second half of the year with high interest rates, which are going to continue to stymie housing and housing consumption, housing development, housing construction, all of those things. And, oh, by the way, Build Back Better is great, but it's really not driving as much demand as they thought. The money is harder to get to. And so until industrial rebounds, there isn't going to be that demand that really stokes the freight market the way that everybody is expecting. And in the end, there has never been a capacity constrained market driven event. It has always come from a combination of demand increasing along with a restricted supply of capacity. And that can be carriers exiting the market, carriers building more slowly, whatever it might be. But in the end, it has never come from just purely capacity leaving the market.
So, I mean, we saw some capacity leave in 23. We saw some big names like Convoy go under. We saw big, even bigger names like Yellow go down. Do you suspect we're going to see any big players this year, or is it too early to tell if there's going to be some additional capacity exiting at a significant scale?
So to be clear, I don't feel like Convoy leaving the market is any indication of capacity leaving
That's
the
fair.
market.
That's fair. They ran out
Right,
of money. The
because
music
Convoy
stopped.
is an intermediary. And yes, there have been a lot of carriers that have left the market. That data is super murky, right? Super murky because in the grand scheme of things, carriers come and go, authorities come and go. That doesn't necessarily indicate actual drivers and tractors leaving the market. I think we're going to continue to see bankruptcies. I think those bankruptcies, assuming what I believe is going to occur, which is we're going to have a very flat year, maybe experience a peak season, a real peak season, a normal peak season like we have experienced pre-pandemic, a little bit of normalization of the supply chain. I think there are a lot of carriers that are running on fumes right now that
Yeah.
had a really nice couple of years, did a good job of socking things away, maybe had some PPP dollars that they were saving up and could use to spend, but they're really struggling to get there. And we see it every day. The rates continue to bounce along the bottom. There's been no material inflection that we've seen of any kind. And there's no projection of that inflection coming anytime soon.
Do you think
And
we're
the
at the
only thing I'm going to
bottom?
say,
Oh, sorry, go
yes,
ahead.
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. The thing is that I think we could bounce along this bottom for quite a while.
Oh, okay. Well, before we get to how long we think that might be, I'm really curious to kind of get an understanding of like, how in the world did you find yourself in the supply chain? How did you get into this business to begin with?
It was the perfectly logical way. I went and got a degree in English literature and started waiting tables
There
and
you go.
no idea what to do with my life. I figured out I was going to probably end up in sales. I believe that sales were the thing that I needed to, probably the best place for me. I'm not shy with words. I'm not, it's not hard for me to have a conversation. I'm a wickedly curious person. I always have been. And I made a friend, was playing some golf. He was doing some consulting work for American backhaulers, helping them
Okay.
grow their HR programs, 401k benefits. And he came into my section at Macaroni Grill one day and said, hey, with his family and said, hey, give me your resume. I'm working with this great company. I think you'd fit really well with them. And I interviewed with them about, I don't know, 4 weeks later, was hired, was offering a job to start. And that was January 12th, 1998 was my first day at American Backhaulers. And, look, in the end, I fell in love with one, the industry is interesting because you get to touch so many different companies, you get to learn about so many different businesses. But I also fell in love with the people side of things and both building relationships with customers, but also the internal camaraderie, working with people that looked like you, acted like you,
Yeah.
had a similar background as you. They weren't crazy, intelligent, fancy, well educated, like blow you out of the water with anything. They were all just really good, down to earth, hardworking people that were all going after the same thing every day. And like that really resonated with me. And then after a while, as I started to understand the blend that technology and the value technology was bringing, that American Backhaulers was sort of the first one to bring that into the brokerage world in a meaningful way with our TMS that Jeff Silver created, and really started digging into the technology side of things. I was hooked, and that was it.
Okay. So when you going into American backhaulers, are you doing like, what is the role that you're doing? Are you brokering at that point, or what is it? What does your day-to-day look like initially?
Yeah, so they spend 4 to 6 weeks training us, so we learn the systems, and then when I came out as an account manager essentially.
Okay.
I think my title was literally always account executive. I don't think it ever changed in my 14
And
years
A is a
between.
great role to have.
It's fine, but you basically are apprenticing a salesperson who's got a book of business, and it's a book of
Yeah.
representing shippers who have freight to move. And you're entering orders, you're scheduling orders, you're working with the capacity side to get the orders covered. And I did that for about a year and a half. One of my first mentors, and unfortunately who passed last year, his name's Kevin Sherwood. Kevin's a great guy. Kevin taught me everything that I know about building a relationship and having a little bit of fun with it and being your own person. And I really got to know what I could do with myself through Kevin's customers and his business. And then, over time you work to find your way out on your own and start selling your own book of business.
Well, you can then go to C.H. Robinson, and that is one of the biggest brokerages that's ever existed. And I'm kind of curious, like, what was it? How was that transition for you, going from like still a big company to like a really, really big company?
Well, we were acquired by them.
Oh, okay. That makes a lot more sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So 2 years in, C.H. Robinson, who at the time was our arch nemesis, we were $250 million business. Robinson was probably just breaking over $1 billion in business at the time. Like, if there were dartboards in our office, they would have had the Robinson snowflake on them. Like, we literally targeted them every day with the work that we did.
That's incredible.
And so you can imagine how it might feel to one day hear that your arch nemesis has acquired you.
Yeah. I mean, Yellow Bought Roadway, that happened like the early 2000s. This is the nature of the business. How was that transition for you?
So at the time, I was 24, right? I didn't know anything from Adam. I didn't know what a good acquisition and integration should look like or what a bad one should feel like. It felt bad because there's account disputes, and you went from one office to 200 offices, and you went from being in this little bubble where you work together to being kind of reviled at the early stages because they disliked us as much as we disliked them, because we were taking market share from them and we were winning on the back of the system. And let's be clear, then they rolled our TMS out to their company. So like, if they didn't dislike us enough already, they then had to come work in our system.
Yeah, change management. That's a tough one to swallow.
But taking a step back and thinking about it now from my perspective, having acquired 5 companies, like directly been involved with 5 acquisitions at NFI, they actually did a great job.
Okay.
They left us in our bubble. They put some liaisons in our office. They did a good job of integrating us. They did the best with the account disputes that they could. And they really gave us a lot of room to work while creating essentially a capacity outlet valve. Like, backhaulers was so I always say brokers you have a choice. You can either be you can be carrier led or you can be customer led. You can't be both. Okay. So you either start with the truck or you start with the freight. Backhaulers always started with the truck. Paul Loeb businesses always start with the truck. Yeah. And so we were a capacity sourcing expert. And so you plug that into a network of 200 offices, and all of a sudden, boof, freight just disappears off the board. And I don't know if you've listened to Kevin Nolan's interview on the Freight Pod, but he actually talks about this day from his perspective as a new employee he was a youngish employee at Robinson in Atlanta. And the day they turned the backhaulers network capacity onto the network, all of Robinson's excess freight disappeared overnight.
That's incredible. That's amazing. That's amazing.
And so, like, they did a great job integrating us. I ended up staying there for 12 more years after the acquisition. I really enjoyed my time at Robinson. They're a juggernaut, man. I mean, the thing people miss about that business that is so hard to compete with is they have so much freight moving and so much data moving on a daily basis that their market is literally 5 times bigger than any other broker's internal market. So they don't need external data to validate the way they buy a load tomorrow or the way they sell a load tomorrow. Whereas I got to commingle all this other crap together to fake it halfway to even get close to them. They're doing it every day, like off their own stuff. And that is the flywheel they have that will be really, really hard to beat, probably for as long as I'm in this business.
Interesting. Well, then what would make you make the change from going from that giant juggernaut into working for NFI?
That is the question. And I look back on it, and what I would say is like that 08, 09 coming out of the Great Recession, the startup world, it was really starting to get pretty intense on the freight brokerage startup world. And I started to get some opportunities to go be my own boss, to maybe build my own brokerage, to go do something somewhere else. And, honestly, it was really meant to be. I had done some business. I built a program with BlackBerry back when people bought BlackBerries.
Yeah, they're still around. They're doing telematics now.
Yeah, and Sonar or Radar, right, is a decent product. But I built a network shipping a truckload, 50 truckloads a week of Blackberries all over the country. And the partner carrier we built that with is a company called Mesilla Valley Transportation based out
Yeah,
of El
I know those
Paso.
guys. They're awesome.
And the VP there left and joined NFI to become their head of intermodal. He had come out of BNSF before it was at MBT. Well, they started looking for a new brokerage head, NFI did. And the headhunter they used is the same one they used with Scott Webb at MBT. And so they asked him for a referral. Okay. And without telling me, he referred me to the headhunter said, like, this is the guy you need to hire.
Yeah.
And so I got a call, literally had cervical spine surgery like 4 days before. I'm sitting at home on my couch in a soft neck brace with stitches and staples in my neck, recovering from this. And I get a call from a headhunter, and I have been called for years because I've been at the same company for 14 years.
Yeah.
Called so many times. I'm like, okay, well, let's just be clear. I'm not going to work for Command, Coyote, all these people that I'm not going to go work for because they were all peers of mine. They don't want to hire me. I don't want to work for them. And they're like, no, it's none of those people. I'm like, oh, well, who is it? Oh, it's this company called NFI. And I knew them as a warehousing company really at that time. So I had done some deals into them through our Robinson engineering group. And so we did the dance and we talked for probably 4 months. And, what I fell in love with was the entrepreneurial spirit of NFI. And, I joke all the time, I'm an intrapreneur here at NFI. And NFI was a well-established, long-standing trucking business, right? Legacy at the time, 80-year-old trucking company, really fast-growing warehousing business. They really wanted to stand up a non-asset-based logistics business as a third leg of their strategy for diversification purposes, knowing that, when the trucking market gets weak, the brokerage market can be strong and vice versa. And so as a nice sort of counterbalance, they wanted to build that out. And they really were looking for an expert to come in and build a company doing that inside of the company. Wow. And for me, the decision was I really wanted to come in and be a sales and operations leader and a technology leader. I didn't want to build HR systems. I didn't want to do payroll. I didn't want to build benefits plans. And they were going to give me the opportunity to come in and snap into a mature business and build something from scratch, but inside of a mature company. And it's really been a big factor in the accelerated growth that we've experienced over the last 12 years.
Let's talk about that growth. So how many people are part of your division? How many people do you oversee right now?
About 450 people.
That's incredible. And the thing I know about you is your passion for mentorship and leadership. What is your kind of philosophy of getting the best out of people? How do you identify good talent? How do you cultivate it? How do you retain it?
You have to invest in them, and you got to meet them where they want to be met. Right. The biggest thing for me is, I grew up in this business. Everything I learned, I never took a business class in college. Right. And I'm running this division of this company, and I've had a ton of help along the way, right? Great mentors and friends and confidants and peers that have helped me get there. But it was all there for me to take if I wanted it. And so it's mostly about how do you create opportunities for people to go after that if they really want it? How do you create opportunities for people to stand up and raise their hand and trust that they can say, I'd like to try something new? How do you create an organization of people that want to work together and can enjoy actually doing the job when the job can be quite hard? And dealing with freight problems, it can feel like a bad day after bad day after bad day if you don't find a framework to help people figure out how to do that. And for me, in the end, what we're really trying to do is create a community of people that all want to support each other, that all are trying to find solutions to the problems, and that we're all trying to work to get them to their highest and best version of themselves. And then at the end of all of that is I have this, it's an obsession. I was going to say borderline obsession, but it's an obsession with follow through and making good on commitments. And so I am wickedly transparent with our organization, good news or bad news, upside or downside, into a good market or into a bad market. I do everything I can to make sure our teams know where we stand and where we're going so that they are never finding themselves asking, can I trust what's going on right now?
I love
that trust is so hard to create.
I love that you bring that up because what my experience has been is people don't quit organizations. They typically quit supervisors, bosses, when they don't feel that they're being heard. And this idea of transparency is super compelling. How are you taught? Go back in time, like when pandemic breaks out, we start having things shut down. How do you go to the team and talk to them about that? How do you help them understand, hey, this is an unprecedented event in US history for the most part. How did you navigate? How did you go about implementing? I'm imagining remote work things, but how did you deal with that massive challenge?
Yeah, well, first thing we did was we took the employees' safety very, very seriously. So we went, I always say, I always think of it like the mob. We went to ground. We went to ground very early. So before March, like I saw the writing on the wall. I happened to listen to a podcast interview with Nick Kokonis, who is a co-founder of Alinea Restaurant Group in Chicago. Wow. And Nick was anecdotally talking about seeing restaurant reservations through one of their software tools dropping like a rock in Asia, and just how much more pervasive COVID actually was than they were realizing. And we were already doing some contingency planning on like what happens if an office goes down, what happens if a network goes down. We needed to test work from home anyway. So I basically said, let's do the testing, but let's send everybody home. Man. And so we sent everybody home in late February. It was a huge challenge, right? We weren't built to do that. We had all our systems are cloud-based, but not everybody had a computer, a laptop. Some people had desktops, some people had monitors. So like we were cobbling this stuff together, literally like flying the plane while we were building it, right? And through the pandemic, the thing that we really fell into, and my brother is my head of technology in our division and builds our TMS. And so my brother and I were talking through it. And one of the things he had been doing with his team was these Ask Me Anything sessions. And so what I started doing was about every 4 or 6 weeks, we would do an Ask Me Anything happy hour on a Friday afternoon. And we'd open up a Zoom call at 4:30 on a Friday. Everybody would get a drink, and I'd just start talking and update them on what was going on with the business. And then
are those
take
saved?
questions from
Did those things get saved? Are those still in existence?
No, we didn't record them.
Oh my
gosh. We didn't record them. On purpose.
Yeah.
We didn't record them on purpose. Like, you don't want to record that stuff. Like,
I just think like one of the things I always kind of think back to is like the most well-connected, the most influential people in the world, like they don't control anything. The best you can hope for is a heads up when things are changing. And it sounds like you have the kind of network and the kind of curiosity that helps you see something before it arrives. And then how you pivot and how you bring your team in on that, it's astonishing. So as time goes on, we start seeing everything starts getting back to normal. Now we see the freight recession happening. We see some indications. When did you see it, and how did you work with your team on those things?
June of 22. So we were at the height of the best, most profitable year in my division's history, literally like operating at peak profitability, and like with many, many months of peak profitability ahead of us. And I started talking to our ownership and our leadership team about the fact that this thing was going to come to a screeching halt. Mm-hmm. And it was clear, right? It was happening. And again, like I give a ton of credit to people like Jason Miller. There are a couple other people that are out there that are really great data mongers that you can follow and get really great. I believe in data-driven decision-making, not gut feel algorithms, not people's anecdotes, like pure empirical data. And as you start to look at the consumption numbers and you start to see things piling up, it was clear that this thing was going to come to a screeching halt, and everybody was overbuying and everybody was overinvesting. And so, I'm not going to say we handled it perfectly. We did not handle it perfectly. And quite honestly, if I had a time machine, this is what I say all the time. If I had a time machine with like 3 credits, like rubbing the genie, I wouldn't go back and change the things we did because like those 3 credits are too precious, but it's in the top 10. Like there are some things we could have done better. But what we did was, one, batten down the hatches. So understand our costs, make sure we control our hiring, don't overhire. We stopped hiring right then and there, did not hire again. And like we were willing to give up some upside in the second half of 22, knowing that anybody we would have hired in 22 would be people we might have to let go in 23.
That's incredible.
So the needle didn't scratch off the record until like Q2 23, But by then, we had already started to make some major changes to our network. We were already doubling down on trying to find efficiency factors and values we could bring to our teams so we could figure out how to grow this business without adding people. Because in the end, I believe in automation and efficiency for unemploying future people, not for taking away jobs from people that we have today.
That makes a lot of sense. That's one thing we talked before we went live about some of the technologies that you've invested in, you're pioneering. What has got you into technology? What is the thing that is it just a curiosity generally, or is there something really special that you're seeing in the tech that's available today in the brokerage space?
Well, it starts with my brother, right? So my brother is my best friend. He's been my confidant and at my side. He started at Backhaulers about 6 months before the acquisition. So he's 2.5 years younger than me. Graduated from Michigan with a degree in industrial engineering. And again, he wasn't exactly sure. And he came back, he had interned and came back into the IT group there, and then went on to become the CIO of Command Transportation and help build their TMS. And then inevitably, we finally fulfilled our dream in 2016 of working together and building a system together. But through that whole rise of his career and the rise of my career, he's coming up in the tech world and logistics. I'm coming up in the operations world and logistics. And we talk so much that, like, if you talk to my brother, he'll talk to you as a technologist and he'll know operations and brokerage almost as well as a lot of operators you meet, which is a pretty dangerous combination for a technologist in this space. And then for me, don't get me wrong, I've never written a line of code. Someday I will write a line of code so I can stop saying I've never written a line of code. But I understand the way systems work together. I understand the way that systems interplay. And for me, what my brother and I have always been focused on is not AI, but IA, which is intelligence augmentation. And I'll go back to those early days in the system that that Backhaulers built was called Express. And I was in my account management days, and I was working for Kevin Sherwood, and I was operating the system. I was the first training class to be fully trained only on the new system. So it was like brand new. And so I'm on the phone with one of his customers who had called in to ask where a load was. He said, "Hey, can you give me an update on this load? I'd like to know when it's going to deliver." And I'm like, "Hold on a second, I'll give you an update right now." And they're like, "What? No, just go ahead. You can call me back." I'm like, no, it's right here. I'll pull it up and give it to you. And I said, "Oh, it's here, and it'll be here at this time." And it's just this silence on the other side of the phone. And I'm like, "Hello, Kathy, are you there?" This is literally Kathy from Canadian Paper. She may still work there. And she's like, "How did you know that?" And like that moment, right? That surprising and delighting your customer, that empowering your employees to know things that they shouldn't know, or the way they know them, or do less bullshit work, pardon my French, that nobody wants to do every day because it sucks.
Yeah,
Making
absolutely.
the donut sucks. Solving problems, building relationships, those things are fun. And so like I've gotten obsessed with this idea of how do you blend technology together with people to empower them to be their best version of themselves for our shippers and our carriers, who are both our customers, and really helping them benefit from what we're doing without having to use the technology themselves.
That's fascinating. Like, we were talking before we went live a little bit about deregulation in 1980. I want to just jump back to that for a second, because what we see, in my opinion, one of the greatest innovations in transportation was the Motor Carrier Act of 1980. It fundamentally changed, how freight was moved, how we thought about truck drivers, how we thought about freight. For people who are like, who've never heard of it, never thought of it, what should someone kind of think about if they hear the Motor Carrier Act of 1980? What does deregulation actually mean?
I mean, it's like the difference between having the internet and not having the internet.
That is, I like that. That's a
mean,
great, absolutely.
It's like, if you ever hear stories about what used to happen back when during the regulated days with tariffs and people owning markets, and like there was no, and look, I'm a capitalist, right? And in the sense of I believe in the value of a free market, and I believe that if you have a good product and you price it affordably, there will be a market for you. And if you can't keep up with the Joneses, then that market will eventually catch up with you. And if you don't get better at your job, right? Like I believe brokerage margins are going to 10%. And I believe that brokers are going to have to figure out a way to get their operating costs down below that in order to make money, when most brokers today will not make money at 10% brokerage margins. And we have to continue to innovate our way down to that to be effective to do that. And regulation did not allow for those things to happen because they basically effectively cornered people out of the ability to get those markets. And as a result, you paid the price that they told you you had to pay. And I don't know how many times a day you feel that way. It doesn't happen to me very often, but when it does, there are very few things that make me feel worse in a transaction than when I have zero control over the price that I am paying.
I love that analogy because the way I look at this, I try to tell people like deregulation before deregulation, it's kind of like the cable companies to an extent. Like they were just like little monopolies that existed. So my father started at Roadway back in '76. So he was Chicago Heights nighttime supervisor. And like those stories that you've kind of alluded to, anybody who was in this business before deregulation, those stories will soon be forgotten. They will soon be erased. But there's a time I look at and go, people go, I'm ex-Apple, I'm ex-Google. No, no, no. I want to hear X Roadway, X Yellow, XCF. Those companies moved everything. I mean, the most popular truck in this country is the Freightliner. And that was made by CF, Consolidated Freightways. They made the truck because there wasn't a truck that they thought was good enough. It's just astonishing to see how much has changed. But in your career in the brokerage side, how much has changed? We talk about things like automation or technology or softwares. There's offshoring, there's nearshoring. How different is this business than it was 10, 15 years ago?
Not that much.
So there's still room for improvement.
At the bottom of it, the truth of the matter, I mean, like there are a lot of companies out there that sell technology that would like you to believe that they're going to obviate away what's at the bottom of a successful brokerage transaction or a successful brokerage relationship. I will not back off of the fact that I believe a successful brokerage relationship transaction happens with a relationship.
Yeah.
And the problem solving that has to come from the things that go weird with freight on a truck driving X number of miles from a point A to a point B, that still needs a human brain to solve it. And it still needs critical thinking to figure it out. And it still needs and creates value in the relationship that you have and your ability to be able to solve that problem without calling and asking for permission. Because when you do that without calling and asking for permission, you've now just given time back to your customer. Yeah. Whether that's your shipper, whether that's your carrier, whichever side it is, that fundamentally has not changed. Now, have the tools changed? Yes. Have the efficiencies changed? Absolutely. Do we do 3 times as much revenue per head per year in our business as we did 12 years ago? Yes, we do. And that's going to continue to get better. But at the bottom of it, if you tried to take the relationship management out of our business, it would die. And that is, in my opinion, if you look at all the successful brokers that are out there, and by successful, I mean actually making a profit, not what you read on LinkedIn, not the hype they put out there in the world, like actually succeeding in operating to a profitable business, they're all relationship-based in nature. Yes, they're using technology to get there, and that technology continues to get better and make our people smarter, and it makes the network move faster, and it makes the market move faster, but it does not change the base fundamental nature of the job.
Now I got to pivot to talking about Convoy because you really got me teed up on this. So for those who are watching who may not know the story of Convoy, it's a digital freight company. They raised over around $1 billion at one point in 2022. They had a valuation of something like $3.5 billion. And it was all top line revenue. It wasn't EBITDA. Like EBITDA is not a thing in the technology space. You see them, all this chaos happening last year, and they begin the wind down process. What do you talk to customers about? Like, how do you explain to them like what the difference is between a brokerage like yours versus a brokerage like that is really just kind of marketing itself as a technologist and not really focusing on safely delivering freight on time and undamaged? How did you navigate that?
They're not a brokerage. They're a digital freight marketplace, and it's a very different thing. And look, first I want to say, I think Dan Lewis is a tremendous human. And I think there are very few people out there, and Dan's the founder and CEO of Convoy, that never wavered from their North Star, right? Dan, his focus was to always try to take empty miles out of the supply chain, which is what everybody hangs their hat on in this industry. But Dan, having grown up in that industry with his father being in the trucking, and I think it was the moving and storage business, he really understood the problem. The thing is that, and I'm not going to speak to what was the demise of Convoy,
Sure.
because that's for other people to talk about, and there are lots of reasons out there, and anybody can talk about that, because in the end, the factor was that they created a ton of value in the market for the small, medium-sized carrier. The thing that I think is lost is, like, they had a product out there called Convoy for Brokers that we were using.
Yeah. Oh,
Convoy for
really?
Brokers was a digital marketplace tool that allowed us to get to owner operators. So as a broker here at NFI, we don't really do a lot of business with owner operators. We just never have. And we're not a big carrier broker either. We don't load Swift a ton or anything like that. We're really a small, medium-sized broker shop. But when it comes down to owner operators, we're maybe loading a handful every month. We were loading 600-700 loads a month through Convoy, or on pace to do that. And it was all with carriers that we never approached.
That's
And so
interesting.
Dan had found the widget to really create value for both the small carrier and the brokerage community. I think it was just a little bit of a bad swirl of circumstances, because look, what's going on right now out there in the market, a lot of brokers are facing this today. Borrowing rates are really expensive. And the thing people miss about being a broker is you got to float a lot of cash.
That's right. Absolutely. You're a bank,
And, like,
essentially.
if you're a bank and you're going to float 6% of your total revenue, roughly, every single month, and if you don't have that money to float, you're borrowing that money.
Yeah.
And that money is probably 3 times more expensive today than it was 4 years ago. That's a big change. And oh, by the way, if that was 3% and now it's 9%, where's your margin gone? Gone. So, like, it's a really tough world out there right now for brokers. And I don't envy anybody that's out there. Like, I gave up a lot from a upside perspective for coming to a big company and building inside a company, but I also got a lot, which was safety, security, a roof over my head, a great family that supports the growth of our business, liquidity, balance sheet strength, a lot of things that now I look really smart for having done, which, by the way, it was more just I was a chicken shit, and I was scared to go out on my
risk
own.
is a very interesting thing. I have 4 children. My
Yeah.
tolerance for risk is substantially less than a 30-year-old guy who's got no kids to worry about. So
Right.
I totally
So,
understand.
like, risk drove me to make the decision with NFI, and a really nice, great company. I really wanted to be in a private company again too, having been at Robinson in a public company. But it was also that other world out there in the startup world was just a little too scary for me. And in the end, I think a lot of startup brokers today are dealing with a lot of pain that they might not have foreseen 2 years ago.
I think you're right. I'm kind of curious that, as you talked about risk, I'm a lawyer. I like to think about risk. There's this really interesting phenomenon that we talk about, like broker liability. And in a nutshell, for the folks who are listening or watching this, broker liability is a general idea that if a motor carrier does something bad, something negligent or careless, whatever, causes some terrible catastrophe, can the broker be liable? And what we have, like, just as a foundational matter, is a conflict among the circuit courts in our country. So in the Ninth Circuit, which is California and Oregon and Washington, you can, as a broker, be held responsible for or potentially responsible for the negligence of a motor carrier. Seventh Circuit, where I'm out of, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, they said the opposite. They said, no, the broker, Global Trans, you're not going to be responsible for the truck driver making a mistake. But there's no clarity in the Supreme Court. They've chosen not to hear those cases. How do you, running this business, look at the potential liability of motor carriers? I mean, how do you deal with that?
Well, it's really about consistency. So first of all, our general counsel, who's not watching this, would be cringing listening to me try to answer this question. I just want to be clear about that.
Absolutely. This is not legal advice.
Like,
no one take this as legal advice. This is just,
yeah. No, but look, it coming here to NFI and starting to build this program out, it was definitely something we were thinking about. And the way I look at negligent selection and our control of that really comes down to consistency.
That's right.
And so it's like, look, the government has standards. We live by those standards: licensed, authorized, insured. Make sure that your carriers fit that bill. Once you set that standard in place, you cannot deviate from it. The minute you deviate from it, you will end up putting yourself in a really bad position. And so for years and years and years, we relied on both an internal kettle of soup combined with some external products to help keep us there, and a lot of really strong, confident language to our teams to make sure they understood that no one load was ever worth that risk.
Yeah.
We're not going to turn them on. Now I'm putting a ton of that confidence into Highway. And so
Yes.
Highway has become this platform that is embodying a lot of the things that were a little bit more anecdotal and built into SOPs and verbal structure that existed in our business, and has given us a much better systemic foundation to work off of to really make sure we stay inside those guidelines. And we have been in named suits in the past with things, and our process has borne fruit in that regard, in the sense that we've been able to say, we chose this person for this reason. They fit our criteria. We never deviate from that criteria. Here's our published plan. Here's our carrier base. We have done nothing wrong. And I believe as long as you stick to that plan, you will be okay. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't get into a really bad situation with a jury that, responds unfavorably. But I do believe as it makes its way through the multiple levels of the court system, through that one individual situation, that precedent that exists out there for having a good process that you never break will prevent you from being found guilty of a negligent selection claim.
I love that you brought up Highway. I think that's incredible advice, just in terms of like just being consistent. But the idea of knowing your customer is never gone very far from, like, in the banking and the financial world. Like, the customer, but you want to know the carrier. You want to know as much as you can. And with ELDs, like the electronic logging device, the mandate that came down, it makes it a lot easier to know this is who they say they are. And the absolute best indicator for future performance is past behavior. Oh, you're saying no?
There are lots of illegal ELDs out there right now, Matthew.
Really?
Yes.
How does that even work?
Depends on what provider you're using, but there are ways for carriers to use technology to game a multiple book scenario, just like they used to with the old books.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
I mean, come on. Like, this is software. It's not that hard, right? I'm not saying software is easy, but I'm saying, like, the bad guys are always one step ahead of the good guys. Always.
That's fair.
And so they're absolutely, and this is connected to that hobby I was telling you about with TruckingHub, but like,
yeah, absolutely.
Working with a carrier that has built an ELD, we definitely are aware that there are companies out there selling against our ELD product, and they don't sell it actively that way, but it's possible for a carrier to be able to put a 16-hour day in legally.
That's madness. But I do want to come back to TruckingHub. So we haven't had a chance to talk. Can you tell a little bit, what is TruckingHub? Where can people find, what does it do?
So TruckingHub is a TMS for small, medium-sized carriers. We've been, I would joke, we're a carrier's broker. We're not a carrier-first brokerage. We are a freight-first brokerage, because I'm a shipper. I came up on the customer side. By the way, we call it shipper and carrier because they're both customers, but I came up on the customer side of the business at Robbins. And so naturally our brokerage is a freight first brokerage, meaning we go get the freight and then we find carriers to move it. But we are a carrier's broker in the sense that we believe we pay relatively fairly. We develop all these programs to try to give carriers consistent business, things like that. We have this carrier partner we've been working with for a very long time, who came to me back in 2016. We were working on some ELD stuff and had built his own ELD, or was going to build his own ELD. And then after successfully putting that ELD out in the market, the company's called 3MD Trucking, the 30 truck operator based out of the Chicagoland area. And they ended up taking those proceeds and starting to build a TMS that could obviate away a lot of the pain and misery that comes from operating your own trucking company. Yeah. And really focusing on, we joke all the time internally, but it's true. Trucking is a pennies business. It's a commodity. Carriers struggle to proactively invest in their business because they don't have a lot of extra money to push around. The market goes up and down, and it's really hard for carriers to be able to proactively invest in that technology. And so the result of that, we were looking in the market. I was looking in the market for a TMS I could use to give to my small carrier partners that we did high volumes of business with, to do business with them electronically, because it makes my business stronger. It makes the carrier's business stronger. And as a partner, that's what our goal is, to try to make our partner's business better. And so over the years, we've looked at some TMSs, never really found one that really made it through made the cut. And back in late 22, 3MD, the owner, reached back out to me and said, I want to show you something. And they had built and have built a full suite carrier TMS.
Wow.
That is called TruckingHub, and you can find it at truckinghub.com. And essentially, I believe, and I could be incorrect here, I have not found one yet. I believe it's the only TMS in the market that's built by a trucking company and is for trucking companies. And so
That's incredible.
What we've seen is that it does all the hard, nasty, ugly, miserable stuff. If the filings, drug consortium, like scheduling, pay schedules, like the stuff that really keeps small carrier owners up at night, and the stuff that makes drivers quit companies because they feel like they've been cheated, or they don't know what their pay is, or it's not transparent, or they don't have their pay schedule right on their mileage pay or their deadhead or whatever it is. And as we've really been, and I've been advocating for this as a product strategist and working with the company, because I love working with it's not the bleeding edge, but I love working with new technologies that are coming into the market. I love working with companies, especially small companies that are coming to market, supporting them, helping them with advocacy. What we're seeing is that it's actually solving a lot of these hard problems that carriers that's keeping them up at night, and giving them time back, and like material time back in their day. And so for us, what we're going to be doing with it is we're finishing up the integration side of things so we can do an EDI integration. We're going to be,
Nice.
NFI will be integrating with TruckingHub, and we're going to be offering this for the first year for free to certain key carriers. And we're going to be paying for it on their behalf, because we know that it's going to benefit them and it's going to benefit us. And we want to show them that value. And really, in the grand scheme of things, it's as low cost as anything we're seeing in the market, but with the ability to be able to represent a 5-truck carrier very, very well. So really fun and exciting to participate in. And I'm learning a lot more about the bowels of the trucking company that even I haven't learned here at NFI. And man, it is the last frontier of blue collar entrepreneurism. And I believe in it. And it is such a huge aspect of what we do in this industry. And I think it's the least I can do to try to figure out a way to get a low cost solution to carriers that bring them into the digital age in a way that will help them either be more profitable or give them a fulcrum to be able to grow their business off of.
Yeah, that is a great goal to have, because for everyone who's watching and listening here, that for this industry, for high school educated men, trucking is the most common job in every single state in the country, every single state. And the operating ratios that most trucking companies hit, like how much money they actually get to keep, most of them are at best 90%. Generally, it's like 95, maybe 97, even for the best operators in the world. So this industry is very, very thin margins. The cost for a trucking company, it's fuel, it's labor, it's assets, it's maintenance, it's tires, it's insurance. They don't have the time or the capital to invest in technology typically. And it is one of the most dangerous jobs in the country, like top 7 most deadly jobs in this industry in the country. So it's great to see you kind of giving back and taking your passion for the technology and innovation, and then giving back to motor carriers to have them hopefully make some more money or have some more time so they can safely get home, without in the same condition that they leave in. I want to kind of get a couple like hot takes from you. So one of the things the FMCSA is talking about is the speed regulator. So the idea of taking every single truck 2003 and newer and making them slower. Now, many mega carriers and any carriers, they already limit the trucks. They already have this. What are your thoughts? Do you have any thoughts at all on the FMCSA looking at doing something with speed regulators?
So I have a very different take on this now than I did 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
So I did my first ever, I'm embarrassed to say it's taken this long, but I did my first ever ride along with an NFI driver earlier this month. And actually so we're a 3rd generation owned company. three brothers own and run our company, and we have 6 fourth generation family members in the business today, and they all are in various roles and functions, and they move around and learn the business. And one of our fourth generation owners, I'm so jealous that he got to do this. He went and got his CDL and
Yeah, there
became a
you
driver
go.
for
Oh,
our
I love that.
organization. And so I spent a day with Zach Brown, and we did a delivery to one of our customers' stores. And we went from Northern Maryland up to a town just north of Newark, New Jersey. And we spent a full day like going up, doing a delivery, pallet jacking stuff around inside the back of a store. But on the road, and look, I see it ever since I learned how heavy a truck was. I'm an idiot driver, right? I drive fast. I like driving fast, I'll admit it. But I have always been aware of just how dangerous a truck is with respect to how much space it needs to stop.
That's right.
And so I do everything in my power to try to not cut off trucks despite how I drive. And so I expected being in the truck, riding along with Zach for the first time, seeing the vehicles on the road, the cars on the road driving like idiots because they don't know. But I was shocked at the number of trucks that were driving like maniacs on the road.
That's right.
Like shocked. And like the number of times that we had to avoid a collision or slow down to prevent a collision between us and another semi on the road was more than the actual cars. Yeah. And so NFI's trucks are governed. And we believe in that. When some of that's for fuel efficiency, some of that's for safety purposes. What I would say is, again, you come back to that thing I said earlier about when I don't get a choice in things, it doesn't feel good. So like you take the average driver. I don't think the average driver enjoys being governed. And I think the idea of that industry wide is going to be really, really hard to consume. But I do think it would make the roads safer.
I don't disagree with you. I think my perspective on this, and it continues to evolve. People come to this industry because there's freedom on the road. There's something that you can't get anywhere else. And we've already had the outward facing cameras. We're seeing the driver facing cameras. This freedom is seemingly eroded over time. The ELD mandate, another way that getting a little bit more control. But to your point, it is safer. It is better on the tires. It's better on the fuel. It's better on the maintenance. There's a lot of reasons why it's great. The thing that I when I talk to drivers, it tends to be around, hey, I'm paid per mile. I'm not paid per hour. I'm paid to go from A to B, and I don't get anything if I'm stopped. And if I go slower, it takes me longer. It means I have to do more work for less money. And that's the thing I think about is we do a lot to make it difficult to be a driver in this country. Not a lot of parking, not a lot of good bathrooms. There's a whole bunch of issues. So my hope is the FMCSA will come out with a reasonable regulation, but we'll find out in a few months.
I see your side of the argument, and the industry is already struggling to afford the costs associated to operating it. And truck driving is, as you said, a really tough job. I was shocked, absolutely shocked by the amount of critical thinking that has to go into operating a truck every day. I just did not gather just how hard it is to drive a truck until I spent that day in the truck.
Well, so there's two more questions I have for you. And the first one I'm going to talk about is basically around maintenance, repair and maintenance in the industry. So we have coming up in a few months, about 3 months away, International Road Check. This is the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. They're going to inspect, let's say 60, 70,000 vehicles. And like clockwork, like every single year, like without any difference, no delta. It's about 1 in 5 commercial vehicles that are inspected are out of service. They fail. They have to stop and get serviced, get repaired before they can go. And that's when they know it's coming. So presumably when it's not International Road Check, stuff is less safe. Does that number surprise you? But you've been in the industry for a bit, so you know how that people usually just park their trucks, rates go up, and then they go back when the road check is done. What do you think about that?
I think maintaining a truck is really freaking hard. And I think like spotting a brake light being out when you're a small truck operator, spotting a brake hose that might be slightly frayed, like the things that the DOT could stop you and shut you down for or force you to get repairs for, again, it comes back to that time thing, right? You were talking about in the last Like, time is money for these drivers, and many of them, they're not doing a 15-point, 20-point pre-trip,
Yeah.
post-trip after every truck, right? After every move. And like that leads to these things. It doesn't make the road safer. I'm not sure. I mean, I would say that maybe, maybe
Yeah.
it does, maybe it doesn't. I think that the road check is a frustrating situation for pretty much everybody involved, and that includes the DOT, who has to figure out how to stop that many people and perform that many roadsides and give that many citations and shut that many people down. And it's for the carriers and for the brokers and for everybody else. But at the same time, like, there has to be something to hold people accountable to the quality and standards that prevent a runaway vehicle from, killing 5 people or
Yeah.
something else that might happen that could do that. And look, it's still like 35,000 people a year die in truck vehicle deaths, and like, I don't know if that number can ever be zero, but we would like to continue to see that number diminish.
Okay, then the last question, because this is actually, I think, goes on that same kind of topic. So there is a bill in Congress. This bill, I believe it's called the Fair Compensation for Truck Crash Victims. It's a silly name. They make these names to try to make people think it's at the end of the world. But like the number is pretty straightforward. The last time we adjusted the minimum insurance requirement for motor carriers was 1980. That was a long time ago. And that was $750,000. So that remains the minimum required for most motor carriers. The bill in Congress is proposing $5 million. I love insurance. Like, I want people to insure for the risk that they might create. But the other challenge to it we talked about earlier is there's no margin for these trucking companies to afford that. Like, they can't buy a policy for $1 million and then maybe a $4 million umbrella. Do you have any thoughts on like what we should be thinking about as Americans as it relates to how much insurance should a motor carrier have?
The insurance industry for the insurance for this industry is broke. It's just broke. And you can blame it on a lot of different things. You can blame it on capitalism and the plaintiffs' attorneys going after these lizard verdicts and the nuclear verdicts that they're getting, and these hundreds of millions of dollars that are being awarded to people rightfully or wrongfully. The truth of the matter is we probably need tort reform, and we probably need a little bit of a median level insurance, a bottom coming up, whether it's 5 million, whether it's 2.5 million, whatever that number is. If you look at a carrier's balance sheet or their expense lines for a year, insurance is probably the most expensive compounded annual growth rate increase on their lines of expense over the last 7 years. And that's for the $1 million in auto or the 750 in auto. You take that to 5 million. Now, if you take it to 5 million and you reduce the ceiling on these death benefits across the nation, right? Because right now it's happening state by state, it's not happening federally, then maybe there's something to that, because maybe then insurance will actually moderate because they won't be controlling for those nuclear verdicts that they have to be prepared for. But if the two things don't happen in step, that 5 million is going to be another expense that carriers can't afford.
Yeah, I love you talk about the nuclear verdicts. The one that I think about the most was last year with Werner Enterprises, and that case.
That's the one too.
I mean,
makes no sense to me.
This is because I want people to understand like this case, because this case has been something that I've been thinking about and researching for a little bit. So the story goes, driver for Werner is driving in snowy conditions under posted speed limit, no mechanical defects, no loss of control, just driving the freight to the destination. In the opposite lane, opposite traffic direction, an SUV four-wheeler loses control, spins out, crosses the center line, collides with that driver for Werner head on. And then one child dies, another one is paralyzed. And the question becomes, who's responsible? Who's liable? And it goes to jury trial. And it's found that Werner is the driver for the passenger vehicle, they're like 15% responsible. The driver for Werner is like 15% responsible. And Werner itself, 70% liability. It's joint and several. So $90 million is awarded against Werner. And they repeal it. And during that appellate process, interest compounds. It's like $130 million. How in the world can any motor carrier predict that level of risk where I did everything right, and yet I have to predict someone crossing the center line, losing control and smashing into me? It is absolutely bonkers. I hope the Texas Supreme Court reverses it, but that case should be on everybody's mind in this industry about what happens if it goes crazy.
I believe there's one subjective factor in that equation, though, that is not mentioned, which is that was a driver that was being trained,
Yes,
and the
that's it.
driver trainer was not in the passenger seat at the time of the accident. That was the only subjective factor in that scenario that could have led to any liability whatsoever. But yes, that one is the one. And I've met Derek Leathers many times. Not saying I had a conversation with him about this, but like they're a good company. They were doing the right thing. That driver, by the way, there's clear video of the driver operating the vehicle with both hands on the wheel, under the, like, as you said, under the posted speed limit. Like they literally were in the wrong place at the wrong
That's
time.
exactly it.
And it's not to say that they're completely free of liability, because there is some liability related to just operating a piece of heavy machinery out on the road every day. But is it $130 million worth of liability? I mean, like,
It's yeah. Well, and that's the thing with
they're
broker
publicly
life.
traded, so they'll be able to afford it. But like that would take most companies down.
Absolutely. I mean, my understand. So to your point, like the driver had been driving for 7 days and the trainer was in the berth. They were sleeping. So there was a couple other extraneous factors. But as you look at like things like broker liability, that could be a brokerage on the hook for that amount of money. Like this is what so few people understand, I think, in the industry is like what really is at risk. Like the days of the motor carrier being like their own mechanics, their own drivers, their own equipment, like those, like the old before deregulation, those days aren't here anymore. And this stuff in front of us is terrifying. Well, I mean, Dave, I could talk to you forever, but we are at our
Same.
time. Dude, I want to thank you for coming on. I have been such a huge fan of you over the last few years, and I love watching your career. I love your mentality of how you look at leadership, how you look at technology. Where can people find more about you and about what you're up to?
Not really anywhere. I I kind of hide. I'm not out there in that way, really. I mean, I comment on some stuff on LinkedIn and things like that, but like I do this because I love the business and I love the industry. I don't do it for PR or for reps or for likes LinkedIn is probably about the only place you're going to find me.
Well, then, the last question I have, I kind of forgot about this, is at what point in your career in transportation did you realize you couldn't get out of it? Have you realized that? Has that crystallized for you, or are you still kind of not quite sure?
No, I think it's here. And we were talking about this a little bit before we started. I think it's when I realized that it was the path to my scratching that entrepreneurial itch.
Yeah.
And realizing that I've invested so much time in myself in this industry and meeting people and knowing people and building relationships and understanding the underpinnings and all these other things that, like, why would I not want to invest, take and bear the fruits or get the fruits of that labor and that investment? And then add in the fact that we are in the middle of this digital revolution and we are in the middle of this massive sea change in the overall supply chain industry in its own. And like, I just feel lucky to have been in the middle of it at the time of inflection.
Yeah.
And so I just don't want to let that go. So it's probably been 5 or 6 years, but yeah, I'm well and totally screwed. I'm stuck here.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. I'm going to kick you off. I'm going to say a quick little goodbye to everybody. If you can't stick around, but again, I appreciate you for coming out, Dave. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt.
Well, that's it, everybody. I got to press the button, here. This is the industry that we find ourselves in. Every single thing that you have, whether it came on a truck or a train or a plane, it's all about the supply chain. Nothing gets to you without effort. And there is a lot of effort involved with safely delivering freight on time and undamaged. As always, I am so grateful for the opportunity to come here and talk to you about the things that I find interesting in this space. And I hope that you learned something, because Dave Broering is a fascinating person in this industry. And we are at, as he correctly identified, an inflection point. What happens over the next 5 years, 10 years, anybody's guess. But the reality is it will take people. It will take technology. It'll take processes. This industry is relationship driven. And as we close off for today, I have to thank again my friends over at DAT. Dial a Truck. Been helping people get home safely with loads for over since 1978, over 30 years, over 40 years. If you are looking to work with DAT, there's a promotional code you can use. I get you 12% off, no, 10% off for 12 months. That's pretty nice. But I am just so grateful for the opportunity to come to you today and talk about the industry that I will never get out of, because you can't opt out of the supply chain. You are stuck just like me. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.